On May 12th, China and the United States reached a tariff agreement, marking a phased victory for China in this round of the tariff war. However, the two sides are still in a state of game, merely cancelling the part of Trump's previous random and chaotic moves. Now both sides are back at the starting line, ready to start a new round of competition in a normal manner. Why is it said that Trump's previous actions were like random punches? Because after his series of operations, the tariff provisions became extremely complex, and many people still don't fully understand the latest tariff situation. Simply put, the current total tariff rate imposed by the United States on China is the tariff rate before April 2nd plus an additional 10%. This is like a slap that has sent Trump back to square one. Similarly, on China's side, the total tariff rate imposed on the United States is also the tariff rate before April 2nd plus 10%. Once this result came out, it was clear to discerning people that the United States had no real cards in hand. The so-called cards before were all fabricated by Trump's random actions. As long as China didn't play along with his game, his own set of actions would fall apart on their own. Although there will definitely be repetitions in the future, just looking at the tariff war, from the intense start to the current situation, it is basically clear who has won and who has lost. This also means that only for months after Trump took office, his so-called way to break the deadlock has failed. Why did Trump start this tariff war? On the surface, he wanted to break the situation where the United States was deeply in debt and couldn't make money. His solution was to implement trade protectionism and try to revitalize the US domestic industry. He believed that if the industry was revitalized, money could be made, and the debt problem would be solved naturally. If only looking at this level, some people really thought he was doing good for the United States and was the great savior of America. But if you think more carefully, have you ever seen anyone who is truly dedicated to the country use their position to make money through stock trading and issuing coins for themselves? So, Trump's true purpose was not that simple. In fact, the real situation he wanted to change was the situation controlled by Wall Street. What was going on? Under the previous game rules dominated by Wall Street, the wealth plundered by the United States from all over the world flowed into the pockets of those on Wall Street, while the local entrepreneurs, farmers, workers, and rednecks represented by Trump could only get a small share. By 2007, when the subprime mortgage crisis broke out, even this small share disappeared. How could they tolerate this? Therefore, although Trump's behavior style was rather unpredictable, and even could be said to be extremely unconventional, he was still able to enter the White House for the second time. What this reflects behind the scenes is the strong desire of those outsiders who couldn't get a share under the Wall Street rules to break the situation. Trump's so-called way to break the deadlock, in simple terms, was to change the global blood-sucking system of the United States. Of course, blood-sucking would still continue because the nature of the United States couldn't be changed. But he didn't want to use the Wall Street system anymore. He wanted to rebuild a new blood-sucking system so that the sucked blood could flow into his own and the stomachs of those he represented. Then how did the previous Wall Street blood-sucking system operate? It was not complicated. It was to manipulate international capital to invest everywhere. On the one hand, make money through investment, and on the other hand, collect interest. If there was an appropriate opportunity, it could even bring down the economy of a place and then take everything. These operations were carried out in high-end office buildings by a group of financial elites. The rednecks didn't even understand what was going on. Moreover, these cross-border investment behaviors led to the loss of a large number of American industries overseas. Without industries, the jobs and incomes of the rednecks were gone, and they lost completely. What was the new system that Trump wanted to establish like? It was extremely simple and crude. That is, to force other countries to buy American products. Don't look down on this simple move. If it could really succeed, the incomes of the rednecks would definitely increase. But anyone with a normal mind knew that this simply wouldn't work. Why? Because the loss of the US manufacturing industry didn't happen overnight. It was a problem that had accumulated over time. Rebuilding the manufacturing industry couldn't be achieved without decades of accumulation. But Trump didn't care about this. He insisted on doing it forcefully, which led to the tariff wars we saw, with him randomly attacking like a madman. However, during this process, Trump wasn't alone in the fight. The global hegemony system established by the financial tycoons before instead became his greatest help. It was like someone else planted a tree and Trump came to enjoy the shade. So, although countries knew that Trump was just messing around, when he officially announced the implementation of reciprocal tariffs on April 2nd, many countries were so frightened that they immediately submitted. This was the coercion or Higman. There was no way, as many countries didn't have enough strength and didn't dare not to submit. But everyone also knew in their hearts that whether most countries submitted or not didn't matter much. The key was China's attitude. To pressure China, just relying on Trump's empty talk wouldn't work. He had to use all the hegemonic forces that the United States had established before. For example, the Asia-Pacific rebalancing strategy launched by Obama in 2012 and the US-Japan-Australia-India quadrilateral alliance targeting China established in 2016. Trump thought that if he could use these systems to successfully pressure China, then his way to break the deadlock would be considered a short-term victory. But what was the result? Reality slapped him hard in the face. Now Japan's intention to betray the United States was almost written all over its face. After being surrounded by China's Type 055 large destroyers, Australia completely cowered and didn't dare to jump around anymore. As for his last trump card, India, with the good equipment given by the West, was beaten to the ground by Pakistan using ordinary Chinese equipment. Trump then realized that the tree planted by his predecessors was a crooked one and completely unreliable. He wasn't doing well either. A few days ago, he took the initiative to cease fire with the Houthi armed forces, leaving Israel alone in the Red Sea, making Israel tremble with fear. Now, with no other viable options, the US is forced to bypass China and attempt to exploit other nations instead. However, other countries are not naive. Witnessing China's firm stance against American pressure, even those inclined to yield to the US are now adopting a wait-and-see attitude. In essence, China's perseverance has created space for other nations to resist American dominance, giving them the flexibility to avoid immediate submission. That said, there are still countries hostile toward China and unlikely to cooperate with it. Ironically, many of these nations are US allies. As a result, the US may end up primarily exploiting its own allies for economic gain. This dynamic underscores the profound impact of the tariff war, which has the potential to reshape the entire global landscape. Some may wonder, if the US-China tariff agreement marked a phased victory for China, why does it seem that the ultimate outcome remains unchanged, tariff war or not? The key lies in a critical metric, the fluidity of trade. Everyone knows that making money through business is desirable. Trump's push for reciprocal tariffs stemmed largely from the US-China trade deficit, which neared $300 billion in 2024. In Trump's view, this meant China was taking too much money from the US, and he sought to reclaim it via tariffs. What he either ignored or pretended not to understand, however, is that the US is far from the only country with a large trade deficit with China. In 2024, China's total goods trade surplus reached $992.2 billion, nearly $1 trillion, the largest single economy trade surplus in human history, and a figure that grows annually. At first glance, this might seem like cause for celebration. China is earning more and growing more prosperous, prompting American envy. But is this truly the case? From the US perspective, envy is understandable after all. Dollars represent real wealth to Americans, granting them access to global goods. Yet from China's standpoint, accumulating vast quantities of dollars does not necessarily equate to genuine prosperity. Since the 1971 collapse of the Bretton Woods system, the dollar has been decoupled from gold, devolving into little more than printed paper. Today's international trade system resembles a dream created by the Federal Reserve. Americans print dollars out of thin air, generating illusory demand and providing liquidity to global markets. While this liquidity has indeed fueled China's development to some extent, a deeper problem emerges. China is essentially exchanging hard labor for depreciating paper, subsidizing American lifestyles with its sweat. Why call the dollar worthless paper? Because a monetary system based on unchecked money printing inherently guarantees long-term devaluation, with its value ultimately tending toward zero. In the long run, the dollar is little different from trash. In the short term, however, dollars still hold some utility, namely, the ability to purchase goods from other countries. Think of it as a game of hot potato. Though you hold an asset prone to depreciation, you can pass it to the next player before its value collapses. As the global manufacturing hub, China occupies a central position in the international dollar circulation system. Dollars often flow through China first after leaving the US, giving China an advantage in the hot potato game. This has led many American elites to complain that China is free-riding on the US financial system. But this advantage hinges on one critical condition: the ability to pass the potato along, that is, to spend the dollars on actual goods. On the surface, spending money seems straightforward. Yet with China's annual goods trade surplus nearing $1 trillion, the reality is far more complex. These dollars are either converted into RMB and held as foreign exchange reserves, or parked in international financial systems to earn interest or make investments, but they cannot be spent on foreign goods at scale. Why? First, many products available on international markets have cheaper, higher quality counterparts in China's domestic market, naturally driving demand toward domestic purchases. But the root cause lies in China's overwhelming productive capacity, which far outstrips that of other nations. This imbalance makes full economic collaboration impossible. Consider a simple analogy. Can a region that manufactures airplanes achieve trade balance with one that only grows crops? The former would export planes in exchange for dollars, but when attempting to spend those dollars, it would find only agricultural products on the latter's shelves, far more than it needs. The result? Unspent dollars accumulating indefinitely. So, what happens if this imbalance in productive capacity persists? Generally, three scenarios are possible. First scenario: if resources and population can flow freely without external interference, people will ultimately migrate to developed regions, leaving underdeveloped areas as abandoned wastelands. No one will choose to stay in places lacking opportunities. Second scenario: when resources and population move freely, but a powerful authority implements macro-level transfer payments to underdeveloped regions, those areas can maintain some level of prosperity. This prevents mass migration to developed regions, balancing settlement patterns. Third scenario: in a world where neither resources nor people can move freely, developed regions grow exponentially while underdeveloped areas stagnate. Trapped in place, residents of these lagging regions are forced to endure worsening living conditions with no escape. These three scenarios correspond to distinct governance models. 1. Small government systems, where the state minimally intervenes in economic and social dynamics. 2. Large government systems, where the state actively regulates the economy and society through macro-level policies. 3. The current real world, where geographical and systemic barriers create permanent divides. Some thrive in advanced hubs, while others remain trapped in poverty, with gaps widening over time. What does this disparity yield? Cooperation between the two groups becomes increasingly impossible. When regions have comparable productivity, exchanging goods is straightforward. You make cars, I make phones. You produce doors, I produce wheels, and both benefit. But as productivity gaps grow, high-tech industries cluster in advanced regions. Suddenly, one area dominates everything from smartphones to car parts, while underdeveloped regions are relegated to low-tech tasks like sewing clothes or assembling shoes. When the gap becomes extreme, even these basic industries flee to more efficient regions, leaving nothing behind. This dynamic plays out globally. The Middle East exports oil, Australia, iron ore, Thailand, rice. These regions share a common fate. Global markets value their resources, not their labor. The Philippines takes this to an extreme, exporting human labor itself, hence the rise of Filipino maids as a global workforce commodity. In short, drastic productivity gaps annihilate collaborative production and large-scale trade. The result? A planet divided into two realms: the developed world, driven by innovation and advanced industry; the lost world, trapped in resource extraction or low-wage precarity. In the most extreme vision, this becomes a chasm between modern humanity and monkey world, where tariffs, cooperation, or sanctions are meaningless. The latter can't produce what the former needs, and the former can't find valuable goods to buy, even with zero tariffs. While this divide isn't yet absolute, the trend is stark. China, With its unmatched industrial diversity, hyperscale production networks, and supply chain dominance, is redefining global productivity. Meanwhile, many nations including the US are abandoning manufacturing, hurtling toward the lost world. This explains why China struggles to spend its vast dollar reserves. The world simply can't supply enough goods to match its productive output. True, the US hasn't fully devolved into a lost world yet, but regions plagued by drug crises or deindustrialization already show worrying signs. If America's productivity ever collapses entirely, a surreal paradox will emerge: modern economies reliant on monkey world currencies to survive. This exposes the absurdity of today's trade system, a rickety patchwork of rules, as convoluted as faulty code, propped up by inertia. We can't dismantle it overnight. Too many livelihoods depend on its flawed stability. Thus, China actively preserves the current order to protect global welfare for now. But natural laws of economics prevail. New productivity will birth new systems of exchange. No state can shield its people indefinitely from this shift. We often categorize nations as developed or developing, but this is misleading. The distinction is not static. It hinges on adaptability to evolving modes of production. Consider Britain. A mere European power before the Industrial Revolution, it became a global hegemon afterward. A better framework, advanced nations, leaders in the current production paradigm. Emerging nations, capable of adapting to and participating in this paradigm. Failing nations, marginalized by the dominant production model. No nation is permanently fixed in these categories. Survival depends on evolving with technological and economic tides. Since the industrial age, production has evolved through three phases. 1. Block production. Nations operated in isolated silos, rarely collaborating. 2. Chain globalization. Countries collaborated along shared supply chains, dividing labor globally. 3. China-centered globalization. China's supply chain dominance now anchors global production. Under this model, even historically failing nations can rise by integrating into Chinese networks, while nations that resist risk irrelevance, even former advanced economies. China's true challenge lies not in countering US trade sanctions, but in awakening from the Fed's paper dollar dream. The credit of lost world nations cannot sustain advanced economies. Only a credit system rooted in core produces nations driving real innovation and output can support humanity's future. By building a self-reliant credit framework, China can seize agency in the global economy, escaping the whims of an obsolete financial order. This is the crossroads we must navigate.